Hey ladies, how's it going? Today I'm going to show you how to do the finalizing touches on your charcoal form drawing. So last time what we did was we started to build up some darker values using our compressed charcoal. We also started to build up some of our lighter values, our highlights and lighter midtones using our white charcoal. And then every once in a while we'll go in there with some vine charcoal just to straighten things up a little bit. And then what you're also going to need today to finalize your drawing are your charcoal pencils. You have your black pencil and your white pencil. So let's go ahead and get started. So if you remember, in the last video, I showed you guys how to start building up some background values. When we start to put in values in the negative space back here, this is called activating the negative space, or the negative shape rather, because we're working on a 2D artwork. So we got that started. So we just have some very, very loose values in the background here, and some pretty loose values on our forms. What I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to lay in a few more negative space values with my vine charcoal, just until I'm happy with it. And then we can put our vine charcoal to the side, probably for the rest of the time. So I'm just looking at my reference photo. I'm looking at where I see those darker values. If you don't have a ton of value in your background on your reference photo, it's okay to kind of make them up a little bit, as long as they make sense. So I know this is a question that a lot of people have, what if you have a really, really bright side, like the top of my box here is really bright, or the side of my cone here is really, really bright. And if you don't put outlines, you might start to feel like, how can you know where the edges of the forms are? That's when you can go in here and darken up the side wherever that light is. You want to make it make sense. You don't just want to put like a random dark edge against a light edge. See how I'm kind of building up some values in the background here and blending them away deep into the background. So that way, that light edge of your cone or your cube, whatever you're working with here, pops out a little bit. The worst thing that you can do right now in your drawing is to have harsh outlines. Outlines make things look flat. They don't help you create the illusion of form, implied form. So your big goal, especially when you start to finalize your drawing, when you're finishing things up, is to make sure that you are hiding your outlines, blending them away. See how I still kind of have an outline in the middle of my cube right here? I'm going to take my vine charcoal and try to blend that away. So now my outline isn't so obvious. So wherever you see any harsh outlines, you want to try to hide them. I've got one down here. I'm just going to go in here, and I'm going to darken up the bottom of my cone a little bit, because it is pretty dark in my reference photo compared to the white surface that it's resting on. You're always going to have light values bordering dark values, and dark values bordering light values, helping each other pop out just a little bit. So I'm kind of going in here and just kind of revisiting some things I did in the last video, where I start to build in some background values. Now I'll usually tell you to be very sparing with your white charcoal for right now. If you go too crazy and put a little bit too much in, it'll blend really well with your vine charcoal and your compressed charcoal, but it might start to look kind of gray. For those areas on your reference photo where you see things looking really, really bright, you want those things to be really, really bright. So you only want to see really light white values where they actually are in your reference photo. So I'm just going to keep blending things a little bit. I'm seeing an outline around my shadow. I don't want that. I don't want outlines around my shadows. Especially not something I want. So I'm going to go over with my vine charcoal and blend it out a little bit. And make sure, ladies, that while you're doing this, you are paying attention to the shape of your shadow. You want those to look like they do in your reference. And if your shadow isn't quite going in the right direction, just pull it. Pull it in the right direction. That charcoal will move wherever you want it to go. I know it can be frustrating that charcoal kind of goes wherever it wants to go sometimes, but it will listen to you if you just pull it the right way, wherever you intend for it to be. I'm going to add just a little bit of white back here, just a little tiny bit, to help that shadow pop. Remember, be very, very sparing with where you're putting things. So I'm just building up some more values. Remember, if things don't seem like they're blending very well, just add a little tiny bit more charcoal. And remember, I'm still using my vine charcoal here. I haven't even touched my compressed charcoal yet today. Always use vine first, and then really make those values bold with your compressed. Your compressed is for when you feel really confident about your values and you're ready to make them a bit darker and more solid. I'm wearing a white sweater today, which is probably a mistake, but I can be pretty careful when I need to be. Notice I'm kind of keeping this hand on the border. Your border should stay clean, so that way you can rest your hand there and you can move your paper as much as you need to. And I'm barely getting any charcoal on my fingers at all. Still blending in little circular motions. I find that to be my best practice. But you can try other techniques as well. You can do little dots. Those are usually good for getting in those hard to reach areas like in between here. You can move from side to side. It tends to look a little bit streaky, so just be careful. But try things out. It's okay to experiment. Excuse me. So see how this edge of my cone is very light. So I'm going to go in there with just a little teeny tiny bit of white charcoal, just a little tiny bit. And that's going to make friends with the vine charcoal that's under it and blend together to make a nice gray. Still got kind of a dark outline on the edge of my box over here. I'm going to try to hide that. So in this little area right here, there's going to be a few different values. That's okay. As long as things are well blended, nothing seems out of place, you should be good. I'm going to bring this out just a little bit, just so that there's not a weird white outline. You definitely don't want to have white outlines as well as black outlines. Everything should just be blended in gradual steps of value. So see how this side of my box kind of pops out just a little bit more? Pretty happy with that. I'm going to blend this area just a little bit more as well. Okay. So now I feel pretty good about my values here. Make sure that you are checking the shapes of your shadows. This side of my sphere's shadow needs just to be a little bit rounder. Definitely one of my biggest pieces of advice as an artist who's been working for a while is just, if you're working from a reference, constantly look back and forth at your reference. If you're trying to recreate what you're seeing, you gotta see what you're trying to recreate. So constantly look back and forth, make little tiny adjustments, little tweaks. If something feels off to you, something probably is off. So just look at your reference. See what can be adjusted. And make sure you're paying attention to the quality of these shadows. Are they fuzzier on the edges, or do they have sharper edges? Try to recreate that in your study. Okay, so now I feel pretty happy with where this is. I'm going to come in here with, let's see, what do I want to do first? Let's come in here with our black compressed charcoal pencil. Now remember, we want to be very, very sparing with this. We don't just want to put this anywhere and go crazy with it. One thing that Mrs. Clements, who was a teacher here before me, who was my mentor, is she would always say, less is more in art. Less is more. Start out with less. If you need to add more, you can. But start out with less. I'm coming in here and I'm starting to define where this shadow is. remember what that shadow is called. That's the occlusion shadow. That's the darkest shadow right underneath your form. And it's the darkest because that is the area where the least light is hitting. Now, you don't want to go outlining things. That is not what this pencil is for. It is for defining really sharp shadows, not outlines. I usually don't like to use my finger to blend the charcoal pencil away. I feel like it makes things look just a little bit too messy, and then you got to go in there and put more and more and more. I kind of just like to use little tiny touches. Maybe use your pinky finger just a little bit. Blend a little tiny bit if those shadows don't really seem like they're blending very well. But I definitely don't go in there and swirl things around with my charcoal pencil. So I'm defining some occlusion shadows, looking for a few more in here. Definitely under my sphere. The bottom of my sphere, I already did some compressed charcoal in there. That's a pretty dark shadow. So I feel like that's pretty good. But here's another area. The top of your cone, see how sharp that shadow is up there? That's what this pencil is for. See, I'm not outlining, I'm just doing a little bit of a shadow around the top up here. And then I'm just gently, gently, gently starting to straighten up the side of that cone just a little bit, not doing an outline. I'm just kind of defining, see, I got a little too messy there. Once I start blending with my fingers, things kind of go a little bit messy. So that's okay. I'm going to go back in here with my block of compressed charcoal just because it's easier to blend. And I'm going to straighten back up that edge that I have in here. It's okay if your edges are not the sharpest, cleanest things in the world. It's charcoal. I don't expect them to be very, very sharp. I'd rather your values blend beautifully and your objects be proportionate than have perfectly sharp, defined edges. It's okay if they're just a little tiny bit fuzzy like it is here, especially from when you look at it from far away. You're not even going to see a whole lot of that fuzziness as long as you try your best to get those edges straight. So right now what I'm doing is I'm going in there and I'm looking at this really, really dark shadow that I see on the side of my cone. I started it with my vine charcoal. I'm going to go in here and start to just make that shadow a little bit more bold. But I'm not going crazy. I'm not like packing that charcoal in here. I'm just putting a little tiny bit at a time. And I'm going to blend. Now remember that your cone is a rounded form. So when you're blending, you kind of want to imagine that you really are blending around a round surface. This part of the cone, it's rounded. It's not just flat. So you want to come in here and try to blend to the contours of your form. Use your pinky if you need to get in some of those hard to reach areas. You can always come back in and clean things up just a little bit. I like the side of my pinky. That's a nice... I'm always discovering new things that work for me. I'm realizing that the side of my pinky is really good for... It's just the right size for getting in and wrapping around the forms of the cone. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, and then I feel like I could probably go back in here, and you know what, I'm going to use my white charcoal pencil this time. Now this is an area where you can really straighten up that side. And you can use a ruler if you need to. Just keep in mind that the ruler might smudge some of your charcoal in other places. I like to just work in little quick strokes, redefining those little details. This is a detailing day. Once you've got all your basic values done, things look pretty well blended. You can go in here and gently, 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 using a clean finger probably would be a better practice. Blend that white around. See the kind of motion I'm doing? I'm kind of curling around the side of my cone. And I'm going to go in here and get that little tiny detail that's in the top of my cone, just a little tiny bit. Okay, so I feel like I could probably darken up this area just a little teeny tiny bit. Look for those little finishing touches. And I feel like it gets a little bit darker on this side, just a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead, wrapping that charcoal around the form that I'm seeing. Okay, so now I'm gonna come in here with my white pencil again, and I'm going to redefine the edge of my sphere, because my sphere is looking a little bit like an egg right now, and I want it to be a little bit rounder. So I'm going to come in here with my white. That's as far as I'm going with my white pencil, because if you look in your reference photo, yours is going to be different from mine. But there's a little bit of a shadow right down here. The white kind of only goes in a little bit of an arch. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just creating a little bit of an arch with my white pencil. And then I'm going to actually go in there with my white charcoal. You don't want to use your pencils to fill in large amounts of area. You only want to use them to define edges and get little tiny details. So coming in here with my white. I know that my highlight is right here. That's the lightest area. Nothing else should be as light as your highlight. So make sure that that is true for you. Nothing else is going to be as light as your highlights. Okay, I think I'm pretty good with redefining that. Maybe I'm going to lighten up that little bit of reflected light at the bottom, just a little tiny bit. Good. Less is more. I gotta stop myself too sometimes from going crazy with charcoal and just adding more and more and more, but then you're gonna have just too much. It's gonna just be too much, too crazy, too loud, too bold. And this is a still life here. You want it to be kind of a quiet piece of artwork. It's just showing static objects, not moving, not going anywhere. So I'm done with the edge of my, oopsies, I'm done with the edge of my sphere. I'm gonna actually use my compressed charcoal here to not outline the sphere, but make that shadow that's behind it, the cast shadow of my cube, a little tiny bit more defined. So that way, my sphere doesn't blend too much. I'm not too happy with that. I'm gonna adjust that a little bit. So that way my sphere doesn't get too lost in the shadow of the cube. Remember, you want to use contrasting value, big differences between your values to help your shapes pop out. But you want to do it in a way that makes sense. Look at your reference photo. Look at how things stand out from each other. Okay, I think I'm going to make this edge of my cube, trying to get a good angle here to work at. I think I'm going to help this edge pop out just a little bit more, because I think this side of the cube stands out a little bit more from its cast shadow by being a little bit darker. So I'm going to put a little bit of compressed charcoal pencil and then a little bit more vine charcoal. Not using compressed charcoal block here because it's not that dark. The side of the cube is not that dark. I'm just using a little tiny, teeny tiny bit of compressed charcoal pencil, not really making outlines here. I'm just kind of defining some of those edges a little bit. You can always add more charcoal if it's not dark enough. Start light. Outlines are your enemy right now. You do not want to have any outlines. So try to hide them. Maybe I'll put a little tiny bit of compressed right here, just to kind of help hide that outline just a little teeny tiny bit more. Maybe a little tiny bit too dark, but I'd rather it pop out from its shadow than get lost. Okay. Now I'm actually going to go back here and see how this edge is kind of messy right there. I'm going to actually take my white pencil and very, very lightly kind of use it as a sort of eraser to sharpen up that edge a little bit. There we go. Okay. Now I'm actually going to do the same thing with the white pencil. Wherever I have those messy edges on my cube, I'm just going to kind of straighten them up with just a little tiny bit of the pencil. Making sure my edges are clean. I'm going to come under here just a little tiny bit. Just a little bit. Clean up that edge, sharpen that a little bit, and then I'm going to sharpen this guy. I'm not pressing hard at all with my charcoal pencil. If I press too hard, it might turn out too light, and I just want to use the white in combination with the gray vine charcoal that's under it to make a nice gray that will help my edges stand out just a little bit better. I'm not creating highlights right now with my pencil. I'm cleaning up some edges. You want those sides of your box to be very defined. It's a very angular form. Okay. And if you're realizing that when you're blending with your fingers, it just gets messy again, maybe you gotta just not blend with your fingers. Try to just lay in a little bit of charcoal pencil, maybe work in little tiny circles, and try to hide your outlines that way. Sometimes blending with your finger is too tricky to get in those hard to reach areas. A little tiny bit more compressed in here. There's no perfect formula for doing this. You kind of have to just play around with values, try things out, see what stands out. Okay. I feel like I need to clean up the top of my box a little bit. It's a little bit fuzzy. So I'm going to clean my finger off. I'm going to see what I can do if I just kind of blend what I already have with my finger. Sometimes you don't even really need to add anything. You don't really need to add charcoal pencil. You can just kind of blend things away. If something's a little bit too fuzzy, you can sharpen them up. And then if you really, really need to, you can go back in here and define the edges of your form from the background. You want them to stand out nice and bright. Okay. So this is pretty much the basic process for finalizing your charcoal form study. You know, look constantly back and forth at your reference photo. See what the values are doing. Listen to your reference photo. That is what is determining where you put things here. Come back in here, sharpen up some of those values in the background. These forms right here, ladies, these are your stars of the show. Your background, it's good to have some values back there, but it's not your priority. Come back in here and, define some of those areas in your negative space. That's all your background is for. It's for helping your forms to stand out a little bit stronger. I think I'm pretty much happy with this. So last step, ladies, I'm going to put a little bit more white up here. I think I'm just going to play around with that just a little bit more, just to kind of show where the light source is coming from. Last thing you want to do, ladies, you want to clean up your border. Very, very important. You can't leave your border dirty. That is a craftsmanship problem. So take your eraser, whatever your eraser you're using. Now, you can pinch your eraser into a little bit of a point if you're using your gummy eraser. If you're using a regular eraser, if it's got a little bit of a pointiness to it, that's good. So what I'm going to actually do is I have some fingerprint smudges along my border, so I'm just going to actually kind of blend them into the border, kind of push them in just a little bit, so that way I don't have these kind of rough outer edges. Just a little tiny bit. Not adding any more charcoal right now. I'm just pushing what I already have out into that 1/2 inch border, just so that my values blend nicely on the edges. Then what I'm going to do, take my eraser, clean up. Not adding any outlines to the border. That is not what you want to do in any project, really. Because those outlines will kind of stick out if you put this in a mat or a frame. I do have some pencil outlines left over that kind of annoys me. So I'm going to try to erase those as best as I can. That's why it's super important to draw very lightly when you are drawing your border. Now I think I might have done them a little bit darker for the sake of the demo, but do your best to erase your outlines on your border and then clean up that charcoal. You know, maybe it's a good idea right now to clean your hands. I'm going to put a little bit of hand sanitizer on them because that does help a little bit to get some of the charcoal dust off. Okay, come in here with my tissue. Clean this. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to clean that up just a little bit. See how that kind of helped. The tissue kind of absorbs some of the charcoal, so you want to use it very, very sparingly. You don't want to use it too much or else you're going to take too much charcoal off. But see how beautifully that just kind of blends everything together. Okay. And maybe I'll do a little teeny tiny bit. Don't go crazy if you do this. Very gentle. And then sometimes if you have stubborn little outlines, sometimes you can pinch the tissue around your finger. I'm trying to get this guy. Yeah, there we go. That kind of helped to blend that outline away. So how I did that, if you really need to do this, if you have some stubborn edges that just won't blend, you can take your tissue, use your pointer finger, wrap it around like so, and that'll make a little bit of a point. Again, don't go crazy. You might take too much off. Okay, good. So going back in, cleaning up the border, try to make it as straight as you can. You know, don't push in too much right away. You can always erase more. You can always sharpen up a little bit more if you need to. So hopefully you can get this nice and clean. There we go. Definitely want to have a border on your artwork. There we go. And then I'm going to clean. Oh no, I got a little bit of water, a little bit of sanitizer on the bottom of my artwork. I hope that dries off. I think it should. But yeah, be careful not to drip anything on your work. You worked hard. You want to take care of your paper, of your materials. I've definitely had those moments where I'm really frustrated with my art. It's not going the way I want it to. And I get a little bit careless with how I take care of my things. You know, don't let those emotions dictate how well you take care of your supplies, even if you're having a frustrating moment. You know, respect the things that you have. They work for you. These supplies are working for you. You tell them what to do, but that means you also got to take care of them. Okay, so that border is looking pretty clean. Last thing you got to do, ladies, you got to do this. Sign your name, preferably in the lower right-hand corner. And then I like to put the year. We're in the wonderful year of 2020. Okay? And you are all set. You got it.